So let's talk first about virtual patching. So the idea behind virtual patching is it's very much like patching a server. Servers have vulnerabilities from time to time, and in the past, the idea is the vendor releases a patch, you patch the server, and it's no longer a vulnerable host. But somewhere along the way, IPS has got so good that people were able to deploy the fingerprint that detects this vulnerability on the IPS somewhere maybe at the perimeter of the network or the entry point into that DMZ wherever these servers are located. So in essence, what you really have at the network level is a virtual patch. So that released a lot of the burden on administrators and networking professionals from having to run around all these different machines and patch them and invest a lot of money and time into patching strategies. So IPSs were really beginning to be used, or I think found wide acceptance as this virtual patch. Now, the IPS's primary responsibility, of course, is to do deep packet inspection. It's to look inside of packets that are moving into and out of these segments containing potentially vulnerable hosts, look inside of those packets, see if they can identify something, an exploit, for example. But where their technology really comes into play is in normalizing that traffic. So this traffic comes in, the traffic may look strange, it decodes the protocol, and it attempts to normalize that traffic so that it can see, to see if it can identify an exploit. So there are, with some of the older evasion techniques, you can do certain things to the packet that normally wouldn't be seen on a network or are technically not legal. So an IPS's job is to make sense of this traffic and attempt to identify that exploit. And the process of making sense of this traffic that otherwise looks really strange is called normalization. And normalization works really, really well at one layer of the protocol stack at a time. So if an evasion is taking place, say for MSRPC, for example, or let's say there's an evasion with packet fragmentation or something of that nature. If there's one instance of an evasion occurring at any given time, it's quite easy to normalize that traffic and identify an exploit. But the real danger here is that with virtual patching, admins can or have felt more comfortable in postponing patch installation. Because if you've got this IPS that you trust implicitly at the entry point into your network or segment, maybe you don't need to patch all the servers. And so now we have a situation where it is much easier to bypass an IPS, and so virtual patching becomes a real problem. And I think that the tendency has been to really use the IPS as a replacement for good patching practices over the course of the last few years. And there's even been marketing literature in the past where it talks about using the IPS literally as a virtual patch, and it's not surprisingly it's gained wide acceptance. But so what does this mean? So if virtual patching has gained wide acceptance, that basically means that if the server is unpatched and left vulnerable and you can bypass the IPS, then that's a real problem. And I think that point number one on some of the advice that we might be able to give is that you definitely want to pay attention to your patching infrastructure. If you can bypass an IPS right now, then making sure that your potentially vulnerable servers are patched is absolutely critical. Now, one other thing, and this is really striking at the heart of the problem, is that traffic normalization is an area of IPS research that I won't say I think it's too strong to say that it's been largely ignored, but it certainly hasn't been at the forefront of IPS research in the last several years. There are some very well documented papers and articles and academic journals that go way back talking about the potential for evasion. And normalization has been lacking, I think, because, well, maybe because the computing horsepower really hasn't been there. The problem really is that normalization, as I mentioned, works really well if you're looking at one thing at a time. That's why a lot of the evasions that exist today, or that had existed previous to advanced evasion techniques, were pretty easy to stop, because most modern IPSs had the horsepower to stop one thing at a time. But the problem is now is that when you start evading at multiple levels of the stack simultaneously, there hasn't been a great deal of research put into how to make IPS devices more efficient to normalize that traffic. So if you're pulling off, or if you're attempting an evasion, if you're doing TCP segmentation and then you're messing around with the Indianness of data interpretation at the same time, if it's hard for the IPS to do one, it's really, really hard for it to do two. But normalization at that level is not outside of the realm of possibility. But I just don't think that there's been a great deal of research put into that over the course of the last several years, and it's something that we should think about moving forward. So really, I think IPS devices should be capable of multiple levels simultaneously. And here's the cool part. Here's the cool part. If there's a positive spin to put on this whole thing, I think this is it. Normalization definitely needs to be improved. Like I said, I think maybe it's something that due attention hasn't been paid to over the course of the last couple of years. But if normalization is improved, the fingerprint libraries that most of the vendors have out there are really darn good. And it's something that IPS vendors should be very proud of. And if normalization is improved, the fingerprints that exist today will work as intended. And there are good fingerprints out there to identify many of the vulnerabilities. And organizations, StoneSoft and many others, are very, very good at updating and coming up with good fingerprints. And they'll work perfectly if the normalization piece is improved. So that's the big thing to keep in mind. Now, some of the things you see here are some of the things that Jack talked a little bit about. But one of the things that we've been harping on a pretty good bit here recently is collaboration. I think that the vendors playing nicely together through a coordinated effort on the part of CERT to improve normalization is a good thing. Ask your vendor to get involved. Ask them, are they involved with any universities? Are they doing active research? What are they up to address this problem? And it's something that definitely needs to be tackled. Normalization is an area of IPS research. The algorithms for sorting efficiently and quickly through fingerprints are really good, as I mentioned. But one area that's sort of been ignored is the normalization. So you can ask your vendor, what are they doing to address the advancement of normalization? And then, of course, as Jack mentioned, ask them what their response is to the CERT advisory. Is it on their radar? What have they done to address it? And have they been involved with any third-party laboratories such as ICSA to validate whether or not they actually do provide protection against this? So that's all I had as well, and I want to bring to your attention there are plenty of places to get information. ICSA Labs, their website is full of good information. Of course, StoneSoft and antievasion.com, which is more geared specifically towards the anti-evasions. So I'm Matthew McKinley, and I've been working with Jack Walsh today. And Jack, do you have any final comments?
Just one thing I thought of as you were talking about vendors working together, and that is that there is a history of network IPS product developers working together, and that's in the Network IPS Product Developers Consortium that we run, and of which StoneSoft is one of the members. And folks have gotten together since 2005 or so in that organization, and that there is a history of us being able to work together. So whether it's continuing to work together in the antievasion.com website or wherever it is to try to get normalization and other things to the forefront, I think that's something that is possible and something that should folks should try to do.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Jack. And I would like to thank all of you for joining us today, and I hope that you'll join us on future webcasts hosted by